Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Thursday, July 18th.
Being forced to make a correction in what they were doing out there demonstrates their guilt.
Fear in Willowbrook over a chemical plant set to reopen. CTA, Pace, Metra, all the leaders of Chicago's public transit agencies on their share of the state's new capital bill.
This was a tragedy that should have seared itself into the mind and memory of every American. But it didn't.
As a new heat wave approaches, a documentary revisits Chicago's deadly heat wave of 1995 that killed more than 700 people, most of them poor and black. We meet two local performers making their debut at the Pitchfork Music Festival this weekend. Have you noticed that there seems to be more fireflies around this year? We have, and we'll tell you why. Tips from the Chicago Botanic Garden to keep your garden alive in this crazy weather.
Initially, it was delicious. The aftertaste is going to kill me.
Still feeling that. Find out what liquor-infused pastry caused me such grief. A preview of this week's Deep Fridays. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Paris Schutz. Here's some of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. That's the punishment for Brent Christensen, who was convicted in the abduction and murder of U of I visiting Chinese scholar Yingying Zhang. The sentence was actually imposed by U.S. District Court Judge James Shadid. That's because a federal jury in Peoria failed to come to a unanimous decision during 8 hours of deliberations over 2 days. Christensen was eligible for the death penalty because it was a federal case. He reportedly bowed his head and smiled in reaction to the verdict, while the Zhang family had no visible reaction. Our digital reporter Matt Masterson was at the federal court in Peoria today, and you can read much more about this story at WTTW.com/news. 3 minors have been released from U.S. Customs and Border Protection this evening. This after reportedly being held at O'Hare Airport for 13 hours. The 3 were traveling in from Mexico and are reportedly American citizens. Mayor Lori Lightfoot, Governor J.B. Pritzker, and some area congresspeople say that they intervened to secure their release. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot snaps back at Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle today. This after Preckwinkle sent Lightfoot a letter urging Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson to stop partially blaming gun violence on Cook County bail reform. Preckwinkle says that only a fraction of 1% of gun offenders are released on bail with some prior felony conviction. But Lightfoot says it's apples and oranges. She cited other data that shows that many repeat gun offenders are arrested and then quickly back out on the street because of lax sentencing or bail. Preckwinkle today says she stands by her original statements. A familiar face from Illinois is running for Congress. Republican Jeannie Ives, who came within single digits of defeating former Governor Bruce Rauner in last year's primary, has formally filed paperwork to run for Illinois' 6th congressional seat. She'd be taking on incumbent Democrat Sean Casten. Former Lieutenant Governor Evelyn Sanguinetti is also running for the seat. And in a statement today, Casten called them both Trump supporters who are, quote, out of touch with the values of the district. There are plenty of options to beat the heat this weekend. Mayor Lori Lightfoot announced some extra cooling centers that'll be open. They include some Chicago public libraries, Chicago Police Department stations, Park District field houses, and some senior centers. They'll be open from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. City is also urging residents to call 311 to report any problems. In addition, Cook County is offering some courthouses as 24-hour cooling centers throughout the suburbs. For more information, please visit our website. And on the immediate weather, hot tonight, partly cloudy with a low around 80. And then tomorrow, steamy and sunny with a high near 98 and an excessive heat warning that runs all the way until Saturday. Of course, it'll feel much hotter than that 98 with the humidity. A shuttered medical sterilization plant in west suburban Willowbrook has a chance to resume operations, but not if nearby residents have their way. Chicago Tonight's Amanda Vinicki is here with more. Amanda, what's going on here?
Sterigenics Willowbrook facilities have been shut down since February. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency then issued a seal order citing an imminent and substantial endangerment to public health. Federal monitoring showed high levels of the cancer-causing chemical ethylene oxide, or E2O, in the air surrounding the plant.
There's a host of diseases that ETO is known to cause: lymphatic diseases, cancers of the bladder, cancers, breast cancer. There's also miscarriages it's known to cause. Many of our clients have suffered multiple and unexplainable miscarriages other than exposure to ETO. There's a broad swath of medical ramifications.
That's just one of the dozen or so attorneys representing various clients seeking to sue Sterigenics for their or their loved ones' health problems, all of whom are protesting a proposed consent order unveiled this week. The proposed agreement between the state, the DuPage County State's Attorney, and Sterigenics would allow the company to resume operations.
To say that we're disappointed that Sterigenics is reopening would be quite an understatement.
Before we get too much further into this, Amanda, remind us what Sterigenics is.
Well, ethylene oxide is a colorless gas that's used in a lot of different varieties of ways. It can be used to make antifreeze, detergent, plastics. Sterigenics uses it to sterilize medical equipment. There are other ways to do this, but ETO is known to be super effective. Well, it was on the EPA's radar before. Data made public last year showed it to be far more toxic to humans than previously thought.
Remind us why Governor J.B. Pritzker's administration shut Sterigenics down.
He had really been under a lot of public pressure to do so. For starters, he had made this an issue during his campaign against former Governor Bruce Rauner, who had a financial stake in the company. Also, once that EPA data got out, people who lived near the facility galvanized against it. The plant's near, of course, a lot of homes, parks, schools.
Fast forward to now, why would the Pritzker administration and Attorney General Kwame Raoul decide to let it reopen?
It depends somewhat on who you talk to, but really the seal wasn't going to last forever, and the courts had directed the parties to negotiate. Also, lawmakers this past session had passed a law that would put strict limits on ethylene oxide emissions. The governor had signed that law last month. According to his office, the proposed agreement puts the extra weight of court enforcement behind those limits for at least 5 years. It requires Sterigenics to install new control devices to capture emissions and then to perform 2 different types of testing to monitor that they're working. If they bypass those limits or don't otherwise comply, the company would have to pay increasingly hefty fines. The agreement also requires Sterigenics spend $300,000 on some sort of project in the Willowbrook area. According to the state, when all is said and done, Sterigenics will be reducing its emissions of ethylene oxide from the Willowbrook facility down to 85 pounds a year, a drastic jump down from between 3,000 to 7,000 pounds of emissions.
Boy, that is a huge jump. What's the problem?
Well, so critics, including legislators who represent the Willowbrook area, and then, of course, residents who've hired lawyers to try to sue Sterigenics, say they don't want the plant to reopen at all, ever.
The reaction of the people in the community is one of outrage, and I think they're absolutely right. What's going on here is a company that has for decades been involved in polluting the very air we breathe.
They say any amount of ethylene oxide is too dangerous, and the plant has no business being in a populated area. Also, per the agreement, Sterigenics admits no wrongdoing. It specifically says that by entering the order, Sterigenics is not admitting any violations.
So, Amanda, where do things go from here?
Both parties were in court this morning. Another hearing is scheduled for next week, and it'll be up to the judge to decide whether opponents will get an opportunity to protest the deal in court. The governor's office points out that federal law admits and allows ethylene oxide to be used and released, and says the health of Illinoisans is Pritzker's top priority. Now, Paris, just before showtime, we got a new statement from both Attorney General Raoul and from Governor J.B. Pritzker. It's turned into a bit of a political war, it seems. Pritzker in his statement saying that if need be, and if local legislators do insist, that they will call a special session to pass a new law, but they are standing by this, saying that the special order is a far better method than continuing to go into court for litigation. Again, though, lawyers representing residents, victims, they say, don't agree.
This is far from over, I can guess here.
Oh, for sure.
All right, thank you very much, Amanda. And up next, leaders of Chicago's public transit agencies on their share of the state's new capital bill. The CTA, Metra, and PACE might run a little smoother going forward. After a 10-year drought, Chicago's public transit system is set to receive billions in state capital funding. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a statewide $45 billion capital infrastructure plan into law last month. Much of that funding will come from a doubling of the state's gas tax, which went into effect July 1st. But even with the influx of state dollars, Chicago's transit system still faces a number of funding challenges. Here to talk about the area's transportation needs and goals are Leanne Redden, Executive Director of the Regional Transportation Authority. That's the financial and planning oversight body of CTA, Metra, and PACE. Dorval Carter, President of the Chicago Transit Authority. Jim Derwinski, CEO of Metra, and Rocky Donahue, Executive Director of PACE Bus Service. Welcome all of you back to Chicago tonight.
Thank you.
Before we get into this funding stuff, Jim Derwinski, I have to ask you, how's Metra operating with this heat?
Well, today we're really doing well. The heat never hit the mark that we set where we have to kind of slow the trains down. To be clear, it's 95 degrees actual temperature, and what we do is slow the trains down from their maximum authorized speed within a section of track, so the entire run doesn't experience any delay. It's just where the train can actually go to its maximum authorized speed.
The forecast says the weather will get above 95 degrees the next couple of days, so should we expect 10-mile-an-hour slower trains?
10-mile-an-hour slower trains where they're running maximum speed. So your train from here to Harvard, you might experience 4 or 5 minute delay potentially. Here to Naperville, 2-3 minutes delay. On the Metro Electric, maybe 1 or 2 minutes delay because just the way the schedules are.
So it's a minor delay. Dorval Carter, does the heat affect the tracks on the CTA system at all?
The heat can affect the tracks on CTA system, but we tend to monitor that over the course of the day. And if there is a need to make adjustments to our service, we will do that, but we have no scheduled plans to do that at this point.
And it said it expands the track a little bit, just like it contracts in the cold weather.
That's correct. In any rail system, you have to deal with extreme weather, whether it be heat or cold. And ultimately, we have people who are very well positioned and trained to take care of these type of situations if they were to
So you'll
occur.
just monitor that over the weekend.
Yes.
Leanne Redden, let's get to the money here. How much money is coming from this capital bill for all of the transit systems?
So first of all, it's an unprecedented amount of money, so we're very excited about it. It's a combination of $227 million annually in what we're calling pay-as-you-go monies coming to the transit system in perpetuity, and then $2.7 billion on of bonding statewide for the transit system out of the broader state capital program.
So $2.7 billion right up front, and then $227 million a year. Rocky Donahue, what are the shovel-ready projects that PACE is going to go forward with this money now?
So shovel ready, our very successful bus on shoulders, we're at capacity. We're carrying almost 3,000 people a day.
And this is where the bus goes down the shoulder of the highway.
I-55, exactly. Starts in Plainfield, makes various stops in the suburbs, and ends in the central business district of Chicago. That service is at capacity due to not having buses, not having a facility. So this money, very monumental, as Leanne said, and is going to allow us to expand that service.
Could you expand it to other interstates?
We are. We've worked with IDOT on the Edens. We worked with the tollway on I-90, and part of this capital money is also to expand it on the central tri-state when the tollway reconfigures that and expands that.
Jim Derwinski, shovel-ready projects for Metra.
We already have an RFP approved for locomotives to come in. It's a new technology that we're going to start receiving delivery of those probably in about 18 months. So this will allow us to take it from the base order of 15 up to 42. That'll help us on an efficiency and reliability standpoint. We currently have an RFP on the street to purchase coach cars. Half of our coach cars, over 400 of our coach cars, are 40 years to 68 years old next year, and this will help us in a great way to do coaches. And then the big one that'll face passengers is stations. We have 40 44 stations that aren't even ADA compliant at this time. This will allow us to start programs that are going to start putting stations back into ADA compliance.
So 42 new locomotives out of a fleet of how many?
150, 160, depends on your spares.
So it's not a small percentage that are going to get the upgrade now. Dorval Carter, for CTA, what are the projects that are ready to go forward now with this capital money?
Well, we have a number of projects. One will be the Cottage Grove station on the Green Line, which is a project we've announced previously, but we were still trying to find the funding to do the renewal and rehab of that project, so we're excited about that. There's a lot of track renewal work that we want to do, particularly on the Blue Line, both the O'Hare branch and the Forest Park branch, which we were going to be pursuing. And then I know Jim a lot of times talks about his locomotives going back to the year that President Eisenhower was president, and I talk about my buses, which are old enough to vote, and wanting to be in a position to start doing a bus renewal program. So those are the shovel-ready projects, but I'm also excited about some other things we're going to be doing, like making our system more accessible and pursuing our ASAP plan, which is going to provide accessible stations and make CTA 100% accessible in the next 20 years. I'll be able to start
So
that
CTA
program.
is going to start purchasing new buses?
We will. We will be purchasing new buses. We'll be upgrading stations. We'll be renewing track. We'll be putting in more substations to increase power and capacity. You're going to see a better CTA as a result of this capital program.
Leanne Redden, a better CTA, although the RTA put out a study saying that the capital needs throughout all of the region's transportation system is more like $30 billion. So we're talking about $3 billion here. What are the ramifications of $30 billion in capital needs?
Well, we have to start somewhere, and so this is, as I said, an unprecedented amount of money. So it gives us a good jump start on chipping away at the backlog of maintenance and capital needs that we have. So these guys have really teed up sort of these shovel-ready projects to start hitting the ground fast. And then the value of this ongoing $227 million allows us to start sort of have some certainty in our planning and our programming of our dollars, so they can actually start, these guys can actually start looking a little longer out. And so we can get, our hope is that we get away from this sort of feast and famine of state capital programs of the past, and we actually have this steady stream of money so they can actually keep delivering and create more efficiencies that sort of double down on each other to deliver a better transit system.
So steady stream of money, is there anything else you recommend to sort of chip away at that $30 billion gap? Any other funding sources?
Well, I think the fact that we'll have this steady stream of predictability in this money allows us to go after federal dollars, for example, and leverage it in other ways, leveraging other bonding programs that we could do locally. So it gives us a lot more opportunities for creativity and flexibility, just even in the money sense, to deliver more projects.
Rocky Donahue, the gas tax is going to be pegged to inflation in the years to come. It didn't change for 20 some odd years. Is this going to be a reliable source of revenue for you, do you believe?
Absolutely. This is historic. This is going to transform PACE. Actually has the opportunity to transform our agency. As we mentioned, the shovel ready for I-55, but this is going to let us bring technology into the system. We're 35 years old and we pretty much ran our system the same way. We're starting our Milwaukee Avenue Pulse line August 11th, and it's going to allow us to continue with technology improving the system.
What's the Milwaukee Avenue Pulse line again?
Milwaukee Avenue Pulse goes from CTA Jefferson Park Station to into Niles. It's a stretch that is about 9 miles long, and it's going to be faster service, limited stop. The commute now is about 30 minutes. With the technology of transit signal priority, it will turn that 30-minute trip into 21 minutes.
Jim Derwinski, I think I read that Metra's capital needs are somewhere around $5 billion. What won't be able to get done without more money?
Well, investment in technology. I mean, clearly we're running old technology, so we're going to bring in new technology, 42 locomotives, but talking about doing like environmental stuff like electrifying an entire line or converting the entire fleet to the newer technologies, the greener technologies, the funding's just not going to be there for that, but we are going to start, like Leanne said, chipping away at that problem.
What about ticket technology? I know a lot of people comment that it's still, and it's kind of nice, you can get on the train and still pay by cash and get a paper ticket, but ticket technology has been talked about for years at Metra.
And this is a high priority for myself and the board, that tickets are going to change at Metra. Working with CTA and PACE and the Venture system that they have, we have a distance-based system. It's a little different, but the technologies are out there. A couple of our sister agencies have just deployed and gotten the cash off the trains. We're looking at that, and this will be part of our investment. It's not one of the biggest things, but it is definitely a part we're going to move into.
Dorval Carter, we're talking about two different buckets here. We've got capital money and we've got sort of operating money. Do you anticipate that you're going to need to raise fares or cut any kind of service in the near future?
Well, obviously, raising fares or cutting service is the last thing we would ever want to do. We don't have any plans to do that at this point. But you're right to make the point that what we've solved here is the capital funding problem in the short term. We continue to have challenges on the operating side. The state has continued to cut our subsidy for our operating expenses, and at some point in time, we're going to have to get that addressed as well.
What can't you get done? I mean, we said Metro needs $5 billion in capital. How about CTA? What are some of the ideal projects you need money for?
Well, I have a system.
Where do we start?
I was going to say, I have over $13 billion worth of unmet capital needs just to get to a state of good repair. You know, I'm talking about a system that was constructed, many pieces of it back when Grover Cleveland was president. So I beat out Jim in that regard.
By a few decades.
By a few decades. So there is lots of work that we still need to do on CTA to get it really up to the modern system that we want it to be. But I would have to echo what Jim and Rocky and Leanne have said. This is a tremendous first start. And I also agree that getting the PAYGO money that allows us to start to plan now, and with knowing that we got a reliable source of funding to support that, it's going to be a game changer in the way that we set up our capital programs and the way we plan for the bigger projects that are multi-year and are going to take a long time for us to complete.
Leanne Redden, a big project in the works from a developer is one museum or one central station or something like that right by Soldier Field. He wants to create a transit hub with all Metra, CTA, Amtrak going through there. Where does the RTA stand on that project?
So any developer that talks about including transit in their project, we think that's a great place to start. But you know, we're not sure that this is necessarily the first priority. We've talked about a lot of other priorities we have. We have several hubs already in the Chicago metro area, and I think we want to focus on our existing resources and our existing assets first. But we are certainly open to a continued conversation with the City of Chicago and the developer.
All right, Rocky Donahue, what is your message to drivers that say, boy, I really don't know why I have to pay an added gas tax. I don't use public transit.
So even though you don't use public transit benefits. It keeps cars off the road. It frees up congestion. It allows their goods and services to move. It's not just I don't ride the bus or train. So even though they may not ride public transit, and I'd encourage them to, public transit is taking 40 people on a bus, potentially 40 cars off the road.
And certainly there's studies that it helps the economy when people aren't stuck in traffic all the time. Jim Derwinski, there was a specific project to extend one of the lines that goes out to Aurora, past Aurora into Yorkville and beyond. Where's that? What's the status of that?
So to be clear, we're studying that project right now with some money that Kendall County got through Denny Hassard many years ago. So we're doing the design review right now. The money that was allocated by the governor is probably about a quarter of what will be needed just for the infrastructure. Then eventually agreements are going to have to be put in place, either whether they join the RTA, meaning Kendall County, or you run this as a service out there and cover the operations and maintenance costs. So it's many years out. It's always exciting to see expansion, but that's not our top priority as well.
And Dorval Carter, speaking of expansion, what about the red line down to 130th?
Yes, the red line extension is one of our top priorities, and I can certainly tell you that having the funding that we got from the state is going to move that project along even further than we were able to do before.
Now, is there going to be a deal with Metra to run along some of the Metra Electric South Shore line?
Well, the red line extension is complementary to the Metro Electric line. It's not necessarily a substitute for it. I know that there have been conversations with Metra and the county about possibilities to do some things with Metro Electric, and we're obviously going to continue to have those conversations with them where appropriate.
Leanne Redden, in the midst of all this, ridership has slowly decreased over the last several years. I guess you can blame some ride share technology for that. What do you do to increase ridership?
Well, I think we're doing all the things that we're talking about, modernizing the system, delivering more reliable service, hopefully adding more service in over time too. They're the key things that we're working on. I think I would actually beg to differ with the rideshare just driving, the ridership issue. I think the economy actually drives ridership more so, and that we're coming off a pretty severe recession. And gas prices, drive ridership too on the train. People jump in their cars. So I think we have to look comprehensively at all of this. I think we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about how do we interface in a broader mobility network, and how do we provide sort of rides to, this morning somebody probably didn't divvy bike to work, they probably took Metro or PACE or CTA, but they can, take that home in the afternoon. So we think we're part of a broader ecosystem, and we want to make sure that our information is accessible to everybody.
Here's another question that always comes up. Do we need 4 separate boards here, 4 separate agencies, or what about one agency that just oversees everything? No one wants to take a stab at that one.
Well, I think I probably have been involved in the transit systems in this city longer than everybody else here at this table. And I can tell you that a lot of that rhetoric came out of the fact that we were unable to work together, that we were dysfunctional, and that we stayed in our silos, we didn't talk to each other, and therefore we weren't really being as efficient as we could be as a transportation system. That doesn't exist today. We are working together. I think the success that we've had with this capital program is an example of what happens when we as a group collectively get together and talk with one voice about the importance of transit in this region. And I think that going forward, that's going to be the ultimate way in which we are able to move the system forward in terms of additional funding and additional opportunities for the city.
We'll have to leave it there. We appreciate all of you being here. We hope you all come back to give us updates on all these projects. Leanne Redden, Dorval Carter, Jim Derwinski, Rocky Donahue, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so please stay with us. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, meet some local bands who are getting their big break this weekend at the Pitchfork Music Fest. Seems like there are a lot more fireflies this year. A firefly expert is here to tell us why there are so many and why they light up. How to keep your garden alive when the weather shifts from extreme rain to extreme heat. The Chicago Botanic Garden is here with some tips. And love it or hate it, Malort is a Chicago institution, and this week it's going on the oil, or in the oil that is, a sneak peek of the latest Deep Fridays. But first, Chicago is bracing for extreme heat over the next few days. It's certainly not the first time that we've had to deal with this. In July 1995, a deadly heat wave struck the city of Chicago. When the final death toll was tallied, 739 people had died, most of them poor, elderly, and black. A new documentary from Cartemquin Films, directed by Judith Helfand, called Cooked, Survival by Zip Code, revisits that tragedy. Let's take a look at a clip.
I can't say what shocked me more. The fact that hundreds of people died from the heat in a major U.S. city, or that I had no memory of it. This was a tragedy that should have seared itself into the mind and memory of every American. But it didn't. And that's what shocked me most of all.
Joining us now is the producer of that film, Fennell Doremus, from Cartemquin Films. Doremus is an award-winning producer who's been working on this project for the past 10 years. Welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you for having me.
What compelled you and the director to make this film?
Judith Helfand, the director of the film, read Eric Kleinenberg's book, Heatwave, A Social Autopsy of Disaster in Chicago, and was really struck by two things. First, she had never heard of this. As you saw in the clip, she was from New York. This was not something that was on the news or even on her radar. And that was a huge shock. 739 people dying, you would think would be something that would make national headlines. On top of that, she was shocked by just the mass catastrophe of it. Again, 739 people dying in a major American city, in 1995 should not happen. She came to me a few years later, and I am a Chicago producer. I lived through the heat wave, and I absolutely saw the value of getting this story onto the screen.
Why do you think this particular disaster did not stick in the national conscious like other disasters did?
Yeah, that's a good question. Heat waves are really silent killers. Until there were refrigerated trucks parked outside the county morgue, nobody knew that all these people were dying. Unless you lived in the neighborhoods where a lot of people were dying, it was not visible. It's not like Hurricane Katrina or Sandy where there is mass destruction and you really see what's going on.
One of the first statements made in this film is that this disaster was actually man-made. Explain that.
We used the 1995 heat wave really as a portal to get into sort of a larger underlying slow motion disaster, which has been brought on by decades of institutional racism and poverty. And so really what the heat wave does is exposes, and all natural disasters really expose these sort of underlying disasters in communities that are suffering every day before the bad weather hits.
All right, let's take a look at another clip really quick where the director and the narrator of this film, Judith Helfand, talks about that very point.
It was a natural disaster that revealed an unnatural one in a way that I'd never really seen, mainly because I didn't have to. So I went to Chicago and drove from the iconic lakefront to the south and west sides of the city, to the neighborhoods that had suffered the most heat deaths in 1995. It was obvious something devastating had happened here, but I was pretty sure it had nothing to do with the weather. This disaster was man-made.
The other part of the title, of course, is Death by Zip Code. Explain when...
Survival by zip code.
I'm sorry, Survival by Zip
Okay.
Code. Explain what you found when you went and looked at what neighborhoods these deaths occurred in.
As Judith says in her narration, when she sort of showed up in some of these communities, what she saw was a disaster, that was clearly man-made, but it looked like a tornado had come through. It was acres of vacant land and abandonment and, shuttered up schools and health facilities, not a lot of grocery stores, not a lot of businesses in general. And, those are the social institutions that really keep people safe all the time, but especially during something like a heat wave.
And there were myriad statistics that you found that correlated with the neighborhoods that saw the most impact from this heat wave.
Yes, the breast cancer rates are higher. The unemployment, school closings, asthma rates, diabetes, it's just layers and layers of ways in which people are suffering all the time.
One of the fascinating things in this documentary is seeing Mayor Richard M. Daley's evolution on this, first kind of taking it lightly and then kind of changing his tone. Talk about his preparation and then his reaction.
We've spent a lot of time looking at the archival footage from that time and trying to understand that evolution, and I don't think we have any answers. Initially, he was very sort of, just kind of brushing it off. It's hot. We go to extremes in Chicago. It's our character. And then, once the bodies started piling up at the morgue, he needed to address it on a more serious level. But instead of really, trying to get a handle on it, and he was very much trying to control it for the media. He was defensive. He was questioning the medical examiner's numbers and count, and we don't understand why any of that transpired. But
do you think that the city and other cities learned any lessons from 1995?
I wish I could say we did. I think the heat deaths that happened in Europe in 2003 would not have been so dramatic had the city really properly taken a look at what was going on in Chicago in 1995 and addressed those in a more holistic way.
And you look at Mayor Lightfoot today. She's out saying there's going to be cooling centers, public libraries, CPD stations. Does that kind of solve the problem of people in impoverished areas not having any access to get out of the heat?
Heat emergency plans are important and good, and I've been hearing Mayor Lightfoot addressing the city, and all of that is very important. Disaster preparedness is very important, but in some ways it's a Band-Aid solution. There are still an ongoing public health crisis in the city every day, and we will have less deaths the better the city communicates a message to go to cooling centers and check on your neighbors. But we're still losing more people every day throughout the city due to structural
And again,
racism.
and I would say the bulk of the film kind of moves away from the heat wave and talks about those issues. There are recent statistics that came out that showed the life expectancy in Streeterville was around 90 years versus Englewood, which was around 60 or 65 years.
60.
From your work on this film, what do you think the solutions are for this? I mean, they're not easy, obviously.
I think, it's really taking, at a federal level, I think it's really investing in these communities in a really holistic way. And I know that might sound oversimplified, but I actually think it is a pretty simple solution. As Dr. Linda Ray Murray in our film says, this isn't rocket science. We know what the problems are. We just need to have the political will to be able to get in and fix them.
What about climate change? How do you think that's going to affect the corollary issue of poverty and segregated neighborhoods?
Very interconnected. There have been many studies that have been done that show that the people who get hurt the worst in any climate disaster are people who have already been struggling to begin with. The more resourced you are, the easier it is for you to bounce back from anything, let alone survive it to begin with. So, I think it's only going to get worse. And
to that front, you saw that you kind of made a parallel to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Were you surprised at the similarities to that disaster and the '95 heat wave?
That was the point at which the film was really opened up to look a lot deeper into not only to look a little bit deeper into the communities and what was going on in Chicago, but also to look at the disaster preparedness industry and the way in which we throw so many resources and so much compassion at disasters in preparation and in the aftermath. When they're visible, when there's something that you can watch on TV and everybody can kind of rally behind them as a tragedy. Poverty is a disaster going on every day in our communities, and we don't see it. So Katrina was, it was sort of a point at which we took a step back and said, we're going to look at this in juxtaposition to the disaster preparedness industry.
All right, Fennell Doremus, congratulations on the film. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
And Cooked, Survival by Zip Code is playing through July 25th at the Gene Siskel Film Center at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Back with more right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Allstate. Allstate is investing in Chicago's youth. We believe good starts young. That's why we're helping our youth develop the skills they need to achieve success in life. Allstate is proud to empower the next generation of leaders.
The 14th annual Pitchfork Music Festival happens this weekend. It is a homegrown stage for adventurous music from around the world, including Chicago. Nearly 50 acts play over 3 days, including legendary soul singer Mavis Staples, the electronic band Stereolab, and Swedish dance floor icon Robin. We visited a pair of young local artists as they prepare for their Pitchfork debut.
On the near west side, Rick Wilson and his band rehearsed their blend of soul, disco, and hip-hop.
I'm from south side of Chicago, far south side. I come from a musical family. My mom and dad like to sing. My mom was in the choir. My uncle and my uncles all had a band when they were younger. My cousin is a platinum-selling record producer. A lot of musically talented people in my life.
Music is vibrations, but everybody still wanna see your colors. Bleeding colors like a VIP shirt of a kid that was thinking about the south side.
I grew up listening to a lot of church music, Baptist music. I also listened to a lot of Motown when I was younger, so I listened to a lot of Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder's my favorite songwriter and singer. I listened to a lot of Temptations, a lot of Smokey and the Miracles.
Actually, we never gonna lose it again. Smack a politics and face in the school, preach a friend, cuz you was never really down for us. You ain't never give a shout to us.
Wilson ran cross-country in college, and he brings athletic energy to his live shows. He's socially minded, too. He visited Cambodia on behalf of the Jane Addams Hull House for talks on restorative justice. And he just dropped the first video from his upcoming debut album.
You sound real good together.
I've been sitting on the curb of Western Avenue, just looking at the city, observing things and looking back in my past life and looking my forward and looking in the now and just been writing. That's been kind of fun. Trying to collide all these things together into one big thing and be like, hello world, this is me.
On the north side, Lily West strums through the chords of a song that ignites when she's joined by her band.
I'm from England. I grew up in London, but I went to high school in Los Angeles. My family's creative, you know, definitely very supportive. They were encouraging of me doing music.
West moved to Chicago 6 years ago.
I came here to go to the Art Institute of Chicago. I went to an art high school and I wanted to be an oil painter. So I came to the school, but I ended up dropping out after a year and a couple months, and I ended up staying for the music scene. My band's called Lala Lala. It's sort of, I suppose, indie rock, although I try and do a little bit of genre blending or like test the limits of what that means.
Their music might be very different, but Lily West is a big fan of Rick Wilson and, like him, cares about social issues. This weekend, all profits from her band's merchandise will be donated to a refugee center in Texas. Both recording artists are looking forward to their Pitchfork debut.
It's my favorite music festival. It means a lot to bring the band that I've brought together and perform with the people that I love, for the people that I love. And also, I'm sober, and Pitchfork was the last place I ever drank alcohol 3 years ago. So it feels sort of like a celebration.
Pitchfork was the first music festival I've ever went to. This is the coolest, like, hipstery, kind of real, like, I'm all about the music people, like, festival in Chicago. And I think that's always been me.
Rick Wilson and Lily West band Lala Lala both play Pitchfork Music Festival on Saturday afternoon. The fest starts tomorrow and runs through Sunday at Union Park on the near west side. There's more information on our website. I don't know about you, but I've definitely noticed the return of fireflies this year, just like in summers of yore. There seems to be a bumper crop, and not only in the Chicago area. So why are there so many lightning bugs all of a sudden? And why do they light up anyway? Here to help answer those questions is Doug Tarrin, who's not only the chief curator at the Chicago Academy of Sciences Peggy Notabert Nature Museum, he is also a serious lover of insects. Someone's got to do it. Doug, welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you very much.
All right, so are you just imagining this, or are there really more fireflies out there?
There are really more fireflies out there. It probably has to do with our very wet spring. The young fireflies, the larvae, eat things like earthworms and roly-polies and snails, and all of those things do very, very well in wet weather and wet soil. So the young fireflies had a lot of food this year.
I have to say I'm partial to calling them lightning bugs. I grew up calling them lightning bugs, but lightning bug, firefly, just because they're back this year, long term they've been struggling, haven't they?
Well, it depends on the species. Fireflies are not actually just one bug. There are many, many species. And there are some that are doing okay. There are some that are in real trouble. But there are definitely more this year.
So is wet weather really the only sort of cause here to the effect of having more fireflies, or are there other reasons that they could be more prevalent?
Well, they seem to do better in areas where people are not manicuring their lawns excessively. So if you don't mow quite as often, if you don't use a lot of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, you will have more fireflies in your yard.
Is there a connection between pesticides and endangerment of some firefly species?
A lot of the endangered ones, it's more habitat loss, and they have more specialized habitats than people's backyards. But the ones that are in people's backyards are definitely going to do better with fewer chemicals.
Here's a $1 million question. How do they light up?
Boy, it's a really, really complicated chemical reaction. And they do expend a lot of biochemical energy into making all of the proteins that are used in catalyzing the light reaction. And it's, if you draw the pathway out on a piece of paper, there are arrows going everywhere.
And as I understand, they're not really flies. What are they?
They're beetles. And they're not flies any more than butterflies or dragonflies.
And what are the species that we tend to see in Chicago?
The species that we tend to see the most is the common eastern firefly. And that's the one that really likes to light up right around dusk.
As I understand, there's a certain species of firefly that's kind of cannibalistic. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, those are the so-called femme fatale fireflies. And so the lighting is a mating signal. And so the males will light up in a complex pattern. And then the females will wait a precise amount of time and respond. And the male goes down and meets the female. The femme fatales mimic that, and the males go down and think they're meeting a female, but they're actually meeting a female of a different species, and she's interested in having him for dinner.
Oh boy. Wow, that's dangerous. That's not what you expected, I think, if you're the male firefly there.
It's an unpleasant surprise.
You
I'm
thought
sure.
you might be meeting for dinner. You just didn't think you were going to be the meal. All right. So what does the rest of the summer look like? Are we going to see them around in these numbers until September, October?
They're just about peaking right now. Over the next couple of weeks, they're going to taper down. And as you get into August, you really see fewer fireflies. And that's just part of their normal cycle.
Do you anticipate this kind of firefly season in years to come?
It's so dependent on the weather. It's going to depend on what the weather does in years to come.
Because I remember every summer when I was a kid, they were around, and then it seemed like for a decade or so, they were gone. Is that just because of a not very wet spring?
They do seem to have a multi-decade cycle of being more and less abundant, and that's coming out of some research, I believe, in Michigan that has shown that.
Anything else that we did not know about fireflies that we might be surprised to learn?
You can probably find multiple species in your backyard, and what you want to look at is different flashing patterns. A little later at night than the main light show, if you look up higher, about 15 feet in the air, you will sometimes see one going in a straight line and just blinking like a little plane moving across the sky.
And the flashing is a mating signal?
And the flashing is a mating signal.
All right, Doug Tarrant, thank you for being here and sharing that information with us.
You're welcome.
And we are grateful for the beautiful firefly footage by Radim Schreiber of fireflyexperience.com. Up next, how to prevent your garden from drying out when we're hit with this extreme heat this weekend. With all this wet weather and the coming heat wave, what is a gardener to do? Here with some tips is Eliza Fournier, the manager of community gardening at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Eliza, welcome back.
Great to be here.
All right, first question, what are you seeing in gardens after this super wet spring and early summer?
What did you think about today's weather? I mean, it's just been an up, down, all over the place kind of spring. We were going to come on and talk about how much it's been raining, and then all last week it was dry. And then this big rain today. It's just very dramatic.
Unpredictable.
Yes, indeed. So we're seeing lots of, it was heavy, heavy growth in the spring, and now things slow down. Plants are confused.
And you brought a couple of samples here. We have the different stages of plant death, it looks like.
I did. So here's a Monarda, or a bee balm, which is a fantastic native plant to attract pollinators into your garden. And Monarda is susceptible to this disease called powdery mildew. It starts out by, this really just looks like mildew on the back of the leaf.
Right.
And then it gets a little bit more brown as this travels up the stem, and then it can ultimately end up like this.
Now, is this the kind of thing you're seeing as a result of the super wet spring?
Yes, wet spring. So you want to make sure your plants are spaced out, and anytime you see this powdery mildew, you want to remove the affected areas of the plant.
Okay, so those are good tips. Any other tips to deal with the, formerly wet gardens?
Well, the interesting thing is that turf grass was really impacted because in the spring, when it sets down its roots, they had so much water that its roots didn't go very deep at all. So now when we're seeing less water, except for this morning, it's not as hardy and it will turn brown faster. But remember, it's just going into dormancy, it's not dying.
All right, so now we're going into this heat wave, ostensibly without rain, but we don't know that yet. So how do you go about watering your plants and flowers during this heat wave?
You always want to make sure that you're watering during the right time of the day and delivering the water to where the plants can use it most, which is at the roots. So you can use lots of different tools. One is this nice watering wand, and this is great for container plants because you can use it to reach into plants that are harder to reach. You can use it to water directly into the roots if you don't want to reach your hand down in there. What we don't want to do is waste water by throwing water using a sprinkler, especially during the hottest times of the day. So folks, tell your friends, I do not want to see this tomorrow and Saturday sprinklers going at 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon.
Especially if it's raining, so precision
Yes,
is key.
yes.
But what about folks that are, you just talked about the unpredictability, they're afraid to water their plants because they don't know if it's going to rain. How do they deal with, well, do I water if it's going to rain? Do I play that game?
Well, we always say that if you want it to rain, water your plants. So there you go.
So that's it.
Rule of
Okay,
thumb.
how do you keep your flowers pretty all throughout summer with this unpredictable weather?
Sure. So one thing is you can do a lot of deadheading, and mostly we use this term with annuals, but now is a great time to deadhead your perennials too. So maybe the flowers that bloomed in the spring are kind of stopping now, or you have plants that are about to bloom in the fall, like these sedum, that you can deadhead now to encourage more compact growth and then more flowers.
I'm a music fan. Deadhead means one thing to me, but you're gonna have me deadhead this.
And this is more like pinching back than deadheading. To deadhead, you would pinch up here, but we're gonna pinch it back. So you're gonna bring it all the way back to this node here to encourage more compact growth. So just get in there and right where those leaves. Perfect.
Look at that.
Beautiful job. And so
again, the reason is there's going to be more energy now in the part of the plant that still is sort of vibrant.
Exactly. And where one flower was before, it'll shoot off 2 shoots, and then you get more flowers, which is also better for the pollinators.
So deadheading is a good tip for anyone that wants to keep their flowers nice throughout the next several months.
Keep them going.
So we have a question from my producer, who is worried that her flowers are too top heavy. I think we have a picture of her cone flowers from her garden. So the question for our producer is it okay to leave them alone, or should she do something about that?
Well, cone flowers in particular are very tough plants, so they're really, nothing's going to impact their ability to come back next year, aside from real trauma. Flopping over isn't real trauma, but if you want them to, if you think it looks unsightly, you can just stick a little stick in there, put some twine around them, and help them stand right back up straight.
So it's more about looks. Flopping over isn't going to hurt them that bad. All right, let's talk about some veggie and garden care. People have been complaining about their tomatoes this year. You've brought in a few. These look okay.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about this plant is I've been babying my tomato plants at home, and they don't look half as good, I have to be honest, because of the slow start we got. It was just cold through June.
Right.
And this bad boy has been living in this container this whole time, and you can see it's set a lot of fruit and even has one ripe tomato. Oh, because I'm going to put, one ripe tomato.
Look at that.
Which is great. Again, we want to think about the pollinators when it comes. Also, when it's raining, the pollinators can't get to your plants as well. But this is a great opportunity to, again, plant other things around your vegetable gardens to attract those pollinators so they can pollinate these plants. Tomatoes can only be pollinated by bumblebees.
Oh.
Which is kind of cool. They vibrate at just the right frequency, and as a musician you'll appreciate this. If you want to self-pollinate, you need to get a tuning fork that pollinates at the same frequency as a bumblebee.
That's interesting. Okay, so what do you put around their tomato plant to attract bumblebees?
This monarda, those cone flowers, sedum, a lot of native plants that flower a lot.
Interesting. Okay, now you've got some basil and parsley here. This is really popular, especially for people like me who don't have a green thumb.
This is the easiest to grow in your garden, herbs. The one thing people don't necessarily always know how to harvest. And herbs are harvested differently. Some people take their parsley and harvest it like this and give it a haircut, and they're like, oh, here's my parsley. Great. But that doesn't encourage really strong growth. Likewise with the basil. You don't want to strip it down to the bottom. What you want to do with the basil is, again, just like we deadheaded the sedum, we want to take it down to the node and pinch it
and then
right
rip
there.
It off.
And you can see it already wants to grow 2 more leaves where those once were, versus the parsley where we want to take it all the way down to the bottom and harvest the leaves around the edge.
So parsley down at the bottom, basil, deadhead right here.
At the node.
At the node.
Yep.
At this point in the summer, is it safe to plant anything else, or is your garden just kind of what it is at this point?
No, you can still plant annuals. These nasturtium right here are still these are really heat-tolerant plants that do really well. These begonias are really pretty. These are for shade, so you can still plant annuals like this, but make sure you're planting shady plants in the shade and sunny plants in the sun.
And nasturtium are very nutritious, too.
Yeah, they're edible.
Aren't they?
Yeah, spicy.
Okay, wait, you said, so what plants in the shade, what plants in the sun?
These begonias go in the shade, these beautiful exotic guys here.
Okay.
And then these guys, the nasturtium, go in the
So you can
sun.
plant these right now and have beautiful flowering.
Yeah.
Any difference between perennials and annuals at this point?
You can do either one, but anything you plant right now, you're going to have to baby a little bit because of the unpredictability with the heat and the rain.
All right, Eliza Fournier, thank you as always.
Thanks for having me.
And we're right back right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Earlier this month, we took you on a tour of a distillery that produces a Swedish-inspired, Chicago-born liqueur that inspires devotion and disgust. This week on our summer web series, Deep Fridays, Erica Gunderson and Nick Blumberg pour out a hefty helping and stick it in the fryer.
This week we are doing something that I am so excited about.
And I am not excited
about. I am the
about.
only one excited about it. Malort. We are going to soak pound cake and angel food cake in the Malort.
This is really interesting.
That's definitely like your mom looking at your school art project. Like, this is really interesting, honey.
Oh, that's different.
Wow.
Well, I can't taste it at all, so I consider that a win. Oh, wait, now I can taste it.
Yeah, it's the aftertaste.
That's not good. It's worse.
I would honestly rather do the shot of Malort.
It's worse.
Than do that.
I foolishly tried it too. You can see my reaction in the full video available on our website right now. And that is our show for this Thursday night. Please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.